The glass of the wedding hall doors was cold against her palm. Inside, the chandeliers pulsed with a light that felt too bright, too sharp. Sophia stood in the mist, her feet rooted to the pavement as she watched the ceremony unfold through the panes. Ryan stood at the center of the room, his hand reaching out. He took Olivia's hand, the movement deliberate and slow. He slid the ring onto her finger. The metal caught the light, a single flash of gold that cut through the silence of the street. Sophia did not blink. She watched him lean in, watched the way Olivia shifted her weight to meet him, and then she pulled her hand back from the glass. The air around her was thick with moisture, turning the streetlights into blurred halos of gray. She turned away from the warmth of the hall. Her boots hit the wet stone with a heavy, rhythmic sound. She walked toward the edge of the curb, the mist clinging to her skin, and stepped forward. Behind her, the doors remained shut, keeping the celebration contained, while the rain began to fall in earnest, hitting the ground with a relentless, driving force that erased the sound of her footsteps. The street was a dark, slick mirror reflecting the neon signs above. Sophia kept her pace steady. She did not look back. The rain intensified, drumming against the asphalt and muffling the distant sounds of the city. She reached the curb and stepped off without checking the lane. A low, grinding vibration traveled through the soles of her shoes. Then, the sound shifted. A high-pitched whine of an engine surged from the shadows, cutting through the downpour. Tires hissed against the wet road, skidding in a desperate attempt to grip the surface. The light hit her first, twin beams of intensity that turned the falling rain into needles of white. She froze. The roar of the engine filled the space between her and the oncoming metal, drowning out the world. There was no time to pull back. The front bumper struck, a sudden jarring force that lifted her off the pavement. Gravity vanished. Time stretched, pulling out into a long, thin wire. Everything around her dissolved into a blinding, featureless white glare. Objects and sound lost their shape, spinning into a vortex of golden particles that swallowed the street, the rain, and the night. The silence was absolute. Then, a sharp, ragged gasp tore through the air. Sophia sat bolt upright, her chest heaving as she clawed at the bedsheets. The room was dark, lit only by the faint blue glow of a digital alarm clock. She stared at the numbers. The year was 5 years in the past. She blinked, her pulse hammering against her throat, and swung her legs over the side of the bed. The floorboards were cool beneath her bare feet. She walked to the bathroom, her movements stiff and uncoordinated. She gripped the edges of the porcelain sink, her knuckles turning white. She looked up. The mirror showed a face she had not seen in years, unlined and untouched by the events that were yet to happen. She reached out, her fingers pressing into her own skin, checking the reality of the sensation. It was firm. It was real. She turned the faucet, and the water splashed against her palms, cold and stinging. The apartment was exactly as it had been before the betrayal. She leaned closer to the glass, her gaze sharpening, and let out a long, slow breath as the realization took hold. The future she knew had been wiped clean. The ballroom hummed with the sound of hundreds of conversations and the steady clink of crystal. Sophia moved through the crowd, her pace rhythmic and measured. She did not scan the room for familiar faces. She already knew where he would be. Ryan emerged from a cluster of guests, catching her eye with his familiar, practiced smile. He moved into her path, closing the distance with a casual confidence that had once felt like security. He stopped directly in front of her, extending his right hand in a silent invitation to the dance floor. The music swelled, a slow, rhythmic melody that echoed against the high ceilings. Sophia stopped. She did not reach for his hand. She did not offer a polite smile or a word of acknowledgement. She simply stared at him, her gaze fixed and utterly devoid of warmth. She let the silence stretch, watching as the confidence flickered in his eyes, replaced by a sudden, sharp confusion. He waited for a reaction, but she gave him nothing. She stepped to the side, her shoulder brushing past his, and continued walking deeper into the hall. He remained standing in the center of the aisle, hands still half extended, as the crowd flowed around him. Sophia did not look back. She navigated the perimeter of the room, her attention scanning the shadows near the marble pillars. The air felt heavy with the scent of expensive perfume and the low murmur of business deals. Then, she felt it a weight against the side of her face. She paused by a service table, picked up a glass of water, and turned slowly. Across the vast hall, standing in the relative dark of an alcove, was Adrian Hayes. He did not look away when she found him. He remained perfectly still, one hand resting against the stone pillar, his focus locked onto her with a precision that bordered on surgical. He tilted his head slightly, a silent question hanging between them in the crowded room. Sophia held his gaze, her posture rigid, testing the strength of that connection. He offered no smile, no polite nod of recognition. Instead, he simply tapped his fingers once against the pillar and shifted his weight. In that single, deliberate action, the game changed. He was not a guest here, he was a sentry. She turned back toward the center of the hall, her pulse steady, knowing exactly where to find the leverage she needed when the time arrived.
The office was a cavern of glass and shadow. Sophia pushed the heavy entrance door just enough to slide through, the hinges groaning in the silence. She moved toward the server wing, her footsteps muted by the thick carpet.
Overhead, the rhythmic sweep of a security patrol light cut through the dark,
turning the office into a strobe of visibility and concealment. She pressed her back against a support column, holding her breath as the beam crawled across the wall inches from her feet. The light faded, and she moved again, faster this time.
She reached the server room door, swiped the bypass card, and stepped into the chilled, humming space. Rows of blue LEDs flickered like a heartbeat. She pulled the drive from her pocket, connected it, and initiated the command sequence. Her fingers moved across the keyboard in a frantic blur. Progress bar at 10%, then 20. The screen glowed, casting harsh light onto her face. A metallic click echoed from the corridor outside, the sound of a door latch releasing. She froze, fingers hovering over the keys.
Listening to the approach of heavy, steady footsteps, she needed more time. She forced her hands to remain steady,
watching the data transfer crawl forward as the shadow of a person appeared against the frosted glass of the room. The shadow against the glass did not knock. It pushed inward, revealing the sharp, familiar silhouette of Adrian Hayes. He stepped into the blue glow of the server room, his eyes scanning the corridor behind him before he slid the door shut and locked it. Sophia stayed pressed against the server rack, her hands still hovering over the terminal. Adrian reached into his palm and extended a small silver drive toward her. He did not speak. He simply pointed to the screen where the transfer was stalling. Sophia took the drive and slotted it into the auxiliary port. The progress bar jumped instantly from 40% to completion. The screen flashed a green confirmation. Data copied. She pulled the drives out and stood up, her legs stiff from the long crouch. Adrian stepped closer, his presence grounding the chaotic hum of the room. He handed her a thin, encrypted memory stick, the final missing piece of the evidence chain. He looked at the terminal, then back at her, his expression a mirror of her own cold resolve. They were no longer two separate actors in a game. They were a singular force. Sophia tucked the drive away. The danger had not passed, but the leverage was now absolute. They moved toward the back exit as one. The shareholders' hall was a vacuum of expectation. Rows of executives sat in silence, their eyes fixed on the center of the room. Sophia walked the length of the aisle, her boots striking the floor with a rhythmic, hollow sound. She reached to the podium and placed both hands on the cool, polished wood. She did not look at the crowd. She looked at the giant screen behind her. With a single, deliberate movement, she pressed the command key. The screen flickered, then flooded with high-resolution documents. Financial ledgers, wire transfers, and signatures appeared in stark black and white. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sophia turned to face the front row. Ryan sat frozen, his face draining of color until he looked like a statue.
He reached for the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. The room erupted.
Voices overlapped. Chairs screeched against the floor, and the hum of the air conditioning was swallowed by the sudden roar of accusations. Sophia watched as Ryan attempted to stand, his knees buckling under the weight of the projected truth. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The evidence was absolute, and the room had already turned against him. The order of the firm had shattered in seconds. The heavy double doors of the hall swung open, and the rhythmic tread of security guards cut through the shouting. Two men marched directly to the front row, their movements practiced and unyielding. They grabbed Ryan by the shoulders, pulling him upright before he could find his footing. He clawed at the table, his fingers slipping against the polished surface, but he was dragged toward the exit.
His voice rose in a frantic, incoherent plea, but the guards ignored him, locking his wrists behind his back with a sharp,
metallic click. Across the aisle, Olivia slumped forward, her forehead hitting the mahogany table with a hollow thud. She slid from her chair, collapsing onto the carpeted floor, shielding her face from the cameras swiveling toward her. The room began to quiet as the spectacle faded into the hallway. Sophia stood motionless at the podium, her pulse steady. She watched the space where Ryan had been, seeing the empty chair as the final seal on the past. The air in the room felt thin, clean, and entirely hers. She exhaled, a long, slow release of breath that left her shoulders light. The noise of the crowd diminished to a distant hum, leaving her in a sudden, profound clarity. Years drifted by, measured not in days, but in the slow, deliberate expansion of a global firm. Sophia stood before the glass wall of her office, the city below reduced to a grid of moving lights and silent steel. She traced the horizon with her gaze, noting the landmarks that had once felt like barriers, now merely part of a landscape she navigated with total precision. She turned away from the glass and walked toward the stairs leading to the roof. The air up here was thin and bit at the skin, carrying the scent of morning salt from the harbor. Adrian waited by the ledge, his posture relaxed, his focus fixed on the edge of the sky. He did not speak as she stepped beside him. He simply reached out to steady the heavy steel door as the wind hammered against it. Below, the city was waking, a vast machine she now commanded. The first arc of the sun crested the horizon, bleeding gold across the gray concrete and blue glass. It washed over the rooftops, erasing the last shadows of the old world. The light climbed the building until it reached them, warm and absolute. Sophia felt the ground beneath her boots, solid and unshakable. She took a breath, the air clean and sharp, and looked forward into the light. The path was clear.